If anyone ever asked me to name a perfect movie, I would not be able to give a straight answer. Film, like any art form, is entirely subjective, and there will probably never be a movie that is so good everyone loves it. But if someone was to ask me, is there a movie that is very close to perfection? Is there a movie where everything works so well you'd never want to change it? I'd probably name a few names, and one of them would be Pixar's animated film The Incredibles. I watched The Incredibles for the first time when it came out, and I was just a kid. Needless to say, I loved it. And I rewatched it many times as I grew up. I watched it when I was in middle school, then when I was in high school, then when I was a college student, and finally, most recently, today, as a part-time screenwriter. And throughout all this time, not only did it not get worse, it actually got better. I was able to see new things in the movie that I wasn't able to notice before. It's a movie so good I'm astonished every time I see it. And that's why I wanted to make this video essay, to try to understand what exactly makes Incredibles work so well. I have to warn you, seeing how this is one of the most successful animated films in history, this essay will cover most of this movie's plot, there will be spoilers, and I generally expect you to be pretty familiar with the movie's plot before watching. We won't cover the basic things like the structure of the screenplay, or how the characters are good, or the themes and messages of the movie. Instead, I want to focus on little things that often get overlooked. The tiny details that make the movie so great without us even noticing them most of the time. So let's get started. In preparation for this video, I've shown The Incredibles for the first time to my grandmother. She enjoyed it a lot, but during the movie we frequently had to stop for me to explain certain moments from the movie that she didn't get. Until then, I hadn't really considered how the movie would be seen by a person who isn't familiar with the concept of superheroes and the superhero genre tropes and conventions. Which made me realize just how actually weird the movie is, and how rarely it is remarked upon. The Incredibles does a lot of really bold and unconventional things with its storytelling and world building, which makes it kinda amazing that the movie was received as well as it was.
Millions of people, or the hundreds of people that are going to be annoyed with me tomorrow for not mentioning them tonight.
Consider this. Incredibles came out in 2004, when the superhero genre was starting to become mainstream with movies like X-Men and Spider-Man, but also way before Batman Begins and Dark Knight, and way before Marvel Cinematic Universe. And superhero movies that came before and even after The Incredibles were very careful and slow in their attempts to introduce modern audiences to the idea of a superhero movie. Their settings were intentionally grounded and mundane. They went with smaller villains. They took a long time explaining superpowers before they were actually going to go wild with them. And up until recently, they worked really hard to tone down the inherent weirdness of superhero comics. Gotham went from being a noirish monster of a city to something that looks exactly like Chicago. Dark Phoenix went from being a space alien thing to just being a split personality thing. You get the idea. And here comes The Incredibles, and doesn't really explain a lot of these things to us, but instead drops us headfirst into a lived-in setting where people with superpowers, superheroes and supervillains are very common and have existed for quite a while. They appear on TV, they have connections with the government, there are hints at supervillains with pre-existing stories and deep ties with our superheroes.
Bon voyage. C'est incroyable!
That's a lot to take in if you aren't familiar with superhero comics. Just the idea that some people are just born with superpowers, and if they have kids, those kids get completely different set of powers, is quite a wild one. Superhero movies before that would take a long time to explain where exactly superpowers come from.
Yeah, big change.
Of course, none of this is new to you if you've read superhero comics, and a lot of kids in late 90s and early 2000s did, but still, that's quite a risky territory as it comes to choosing your core audience. In a way, Incredibles expects you to come with a big baggage of knowledge about superhero stories before you even watch the movie. For starters, Incredibles is extremely similar to Fantastic Four, a superhero team from Marvel Comics. The Fantastic Four was quite a big game changer in superhero genre when it came out, because this was probably the first big attempt to make superheroes more realistic and relatable by making their problems more familiar. The comic introduced us to a group of superheroes who were basically a family to each other. The same idea can be seen in Incredibles, down to the fact that these characters have almost exact same superpowers, though the roles have changed a lot. The father of the family is now the one with immense physical strength. The mother is now the one that has extreme stretching powers. The hot-headed young man in the family is now the son of the couple and has super speed instead of joining Storm's fire powers. And finally, the older daughter has the power to become invisible and also to create small energy shields. This one is particularly interesting to me because Fantastic Four is the only work of media where I have seen this particular combination of superpowers, and nowhere else. If I didn't know about Fantastic Four, this would be the superpower that I would have the most questions about. Invisibility and protection shields don't seem to have much to do with each other.
How are you doing that? I don't know!
And I would be very confused about this part if I wasn't already familiar with the material that inspired it. In retrospect, it's something of a miracle that the creators of Incredibles weren't sued by Marvel for plagiarism back in the day. To take this point even further, many on the internet have already noted the similarities between The Incredibles and Alan Moore's Watchmen. Both depict worlds where superheroes used to be common until they were banned by the government for various reasons. Both feature a set of main characters who are nostalgic for the glory days, and both feature a villain who murders former superheroes in order to fulfill a plan that includes unleashing a huge octopus-like monster on a city. And that's just your superhero genre tropes. In addition to them, Incredibles shows us a world that is very similar to our world, but isn't our world. The world of Incredibles is intentionally anachronistic. It still has old black and white TVs from the 50s, the designs of almost everything are more like retro-futuristic take on 60s aesthetic. The level of technology, on the other hand, is closer to the 80s. There are giant robots, secret high-tech bases, super weapons, and no one ever even brings attention to it, because those things are so common in this world. And when the big Omnidroid attacks the city, we know that it's a robot built by Syndrome, but to everyone in the city, it's an alien invasion, straight from War of the Worlds. And Incredibles takes all of this together, pulling from so many different styles and genres, and lumps it all together in one movie, and expects us to go along with it. And it works! It is a testament to how good and yet simple and understandable the characters and their conflicts are in the movie that we are able to focus on them without being bothered by other stuff. But also, it's a testament to how well the creators of the movie understand the strengths of superhero genre. I believe that one of the biggest advantages of superhero comics is that their inherent weirdness allows them to transcend the traditional understanding of genre itself to make a better fit for their stories and characters. For me personally, the retro aesthetic of the movie works as a natural extension of the character. It harkens back to the old comics from that era, but also works as a good foil for the protagonist's struggle. After all, Mr. Incredible wants to be special and valued, and the setting around him reminds us of a time era where individualism was less of a thing, and personal expression and self-identification were barely a thing. It also reminds us of the old concept of nuclear family, which is pretty patriarchal and puts the father as the lead of the family. It works to establish our protagonist's mindset when he keeps secrets from his family, but it's also eventually subverted when the movie shows his wife, Helen, even more capable than him. As for the James Bond tropes of larger-than-life villains, secret bases, robots, sexy henchwomen, well, those are just cool. They are something that kids will find fun, but the adults in the audience will recognize better, as those are the films from their era. Which is a good time to mention that Incredibles is pretty mature for a kids-oriented film made by Disney and Pixar. It is a movie that isn't afraid to show midlife crisis and how people might regret making a family. It shows us that marriage can be very messy, with lots of yelling and disagreement involved. It is a rare cartoon that shows sexuality and sex as a natural behavior, without shying away from it. And it's also a movie where lots of people die. In fact, one of the biggest death scenes, where lots of superheroes die in gruesome ways because of their capes, is played for laughs. There is also an attempted suicide. Heck, our main antagonist gets a death scene straight from an R-rated movie.
I got enough friends!
One of my personal favorite moments is when Helen and the children arrive to the island for the first time, and once the children realize danger of the situation, they panic.
We're dead! We're dead! We'll survive, but we're dead! Stop it!
And in a scene later, Helen explains to her children that from now on, they are in a life-or-death situation, and the villains will be trying to kill them. The children will have to protect themselves in any way possible, which may include killing someone. And yeah, they do exactly that. Congratulations, kids, you are now murderers. Have fun going through years of psychotherapy! Right from the start, Pixar had a pretty tough challenge waiting for them with this movie. They had to make a movie with human characters, when the technology behind CGI animated films was still quite a new phenomenon. Human characters just generally didn't look good in CGI films back then, which is why most of them were either about non-human characters or about characters that were plastic. The director and writer of Incredibles, Brad Bird, brought a lot of people who worked with him on Iron Giant, and most of them were 2D animators, and they had to quickly learn how to animate in 3D. The solution to both of these problems was to make the characters in Incredibles very stylized and exaggerated, as if they were 2D designs brought into 3D.
All our films are challenges. There's always something, we don't know how we're going to do that, but the number of challenges on this film, and the scale was turned up a few notches.
This allowed the animators to simplify those characters, seeing them as a collection of different shapes. Each character now had a very distinct look and shape to them, which conveyed their character visually, and that philosophy was brought over to the things they did within the movie. There are lots of little touches and quirks to these characters that tell us just who they are. Mr. Incredible is probably the most visually expressed of the characters. We see him in his glory days, when he is very slim and his torso is more of a triangular shape. When we see him 15 years later, he lost his shape, and now his torso is more like a square with a sad oval face on top of it. You can feel the weight in every single one of his movements, how it seems like everything is just weighing down on him. His conflict, him having trouble fitting in a modern society, is visually represented by just how large he is in comparison to everything else. He barely fits in his office, or his car, or even in the eject pod in the airplane. Not only that, he is having trouble containing his super strength, often resulting in him breaking stuff. So not only is it impossible for him to fit in, He actively makes things worse for everybody by even trying. Helen, or Elastigirl, on the other hand, looks almost the same in the prologue and after the time skip, which is fitting because, as we see in one scene, she's quite critical of her looks. And it's once again the 50s gender roles playing part with much higher beauty standards for women. Her superpower represents how, as a woman, she has to stretch between the roles of mother of 2 children, loving wife, and a superhero. We can also see that with the fact that she uses her powers in a day-to-day life quite often. Dash is hot-headed and arrogant and a bit of a show, which we can see in the color of his hair and his clothes. They are more striking and eye-catching than the rest of the group. Finally, there is Violet, who is, for the most of the movie, shy, anxious, and insecure about her looks. We can see it in the fact that most of her face is hidden by her hair, that even when she is visible, she is still technically hiding from everyone. She also has huge eyes, which in character design is often done to make a character more appealing and relatable, because eyes can tell us a lot about how the character is feeling, which is also why villains typically have small eyes, or they are hiding their eyes, or they have no eyes at all. Later in the movie, she becomes more brave and confident, and her haircut changes to the one that shows all of her face. And the movie really nicely summarizes her arc with these 2 scenes. This is where she starts,
He looked at me.
and this is where she ends up.
I like movies. I'll buy the popcorn. Okay?
Movie. There you go. Yeah.
She went from being someone who hides from a boy she has a crush on to practically being the one who asks him out, because the boy is now too nervous around her to do it himself. The tables have turned. Oh, and since we are here talking about tables, here's where our family starts, in a chaotic dinner scene where everyone is using their powers to create even more chaos, and this is where they end up. Now that's good direction. Now we have to talk about the use of color in the movie. The thing that I find the most striking about the storyboards for the film is that, from my perspective, the most important thing on them wasn't the story, but the deliberately chosen color palette for each scene, which shows us how even before the renders of each scene were done, everyone knew what colors had to be in that scene. Color is a great tool to convey an emotion and atmosphere of your movie. You can see it in how the glory days are shown in very warm, almost old-school colors of sunlight and orange bricks of buildings, and how that quickly changes to a very cold, sterile surroundings of Mr. Incredible's office, where everything is mostly desaturated whites and light grays. The colors in the rest of his life are also mostly muted, with only his personal office with his big, nostalgic wall of fame being very warm, inviting colors. Then, as he goes on his dangerous mission, the color palette changes to a striking greens, blues, yellows, and even reds. And as Mr. Incredible's life comes back on track, the colors in his life also become more vibrant and pleasant. His house is now more pleasant to look at, he gets a suit change that is now striking bright red, and now we can see these beautiful sunlight colors in the training montage. For Mr. Incredible, it's literally a new dawn, a new day. A new life for him, and he's feeling
Good.
Finally, let's talk about cinematography. Incredibles and every other Bad Bird animated film aren't shot like most other CGI cartoons. For one, there are lots of beautiful wide shots throughout the movie that give us a good sense of scale and atmosphere. And many scenes are shot in small long takes of sorts, where the camera shoots the scene in one unbroken, continuous shot. This often helps to put the audience in the character's shoes. Like here, in this scene, Mr. Incredible analyzes a situation to make a plan of how to get into the secret base. The camera goes here, then here, and finally here. Or how about this scene, where Helen tries to talk on the phone while both of her kids are distracting her. The camera shifts between them, just as the characters are fighting for attention in the scene. Great stuff. Almost every single thing that is mentioned in Incredibles goes somewhere and might come back in some meaningful way, whether it's a small visual detail or a word in a dialogue. This is good for many reasons. One, it's a good way to reward attention-paying audience. 2. It helps us better understand the psyche of our characters. 3. It makes the world of the movie feel more organic and tight when things are always set up ahead of time and don't come out of nowhere like in some other movies. And finally, 4. It's a good way to build small arcs throughout the movie for your characters. So there's a good rule for doing your setup and payoff in a story, called the rule of threes, which sounds exactly like it works. It's when you need 3 main steps in your little scheme. First is the setup, second is the reminder, third is the payoff. Let's look at one of the examples in Incredibles. At the start of the movie, Bob reads a newspaper and notices that his friend and fellow ex-superhero called Gazerbeam has gone missing. This is our setup. Moments later, Bob mentions it to his friend Frozone.
You remember Gazerbeam?
Yeah, there was something about him in the paper. He had trouble adjusting to civilian life, too.
This is our reminder. Finally, when Bob is almost killed by Syndrome, he hides in an underwater cave where he finds Gazerbeam's corpse and learns that he is not the first superhero to be killed on this island.
Gazerbeam.
This is our payoff. There is also a nice moment here where Bob learns the password to Syndrome's computer via the carvings on the wall made by Gazerbeam. This is really cool because we quickly learn Gazerbeam's superpower here. Judging from his design and the fact that the password is burnt in on a rock, it's easy to assume that Gazerbeam was basically like Cyclops from the X-Men, and he used his final moments to burn the password into a wall with his lasers. So, narratively, we are achieving several things in here. First, Bob learns the password. Second, we find out what happened to Gazerbeam. Third, we get a better idea that something really sinister is happening on the island. Now that's good screenwriting. Let's look at another example. In the previously mentioned conversation, Frozone talks about how he used the villain's tendency to monologue to his advantage.
Somehow, I managed to find cover, and what does Baron von Ruthless do?
He starts monologuing.
He starts monologuing. He starts like this prepared speech about how feeble I am compared to him, how inevitable my defeat.
Villains like to brag about their villainous plans. That's our setup. Later, in the middle of a movie, Bob uses this knowledge to distract Syndrome.
Invented weapons, and now I have a weapon that only I can defeat. And when I unleash it, I'll get. You sly dog! You got me monologuing!
This is our payoff. In this case, we skipped the reminder, because the payoff is less significant for the overall plot and happens not too long after the setup. In this case, we only need the 2. You can learn a bit more about this in Dan Olson's Setup and Payoffs video, link in the description. Other examples. Setup.
Virtually indestructible. It breathes like Egyptian cotton.
Payoff. Setup. Reminder.
Syndrome's remote!
Payoff.
Everybody does!
Setup. Payoff.
Can't stop it. The only thing hard enough to penetrate it is itself.
Setup.
Act normal, Mom. I want to be normal. The only normal one is Jack, and he's not even toilet trained.
The reminder.
Had. I didn't know the baby's powers, so I covered the basics.
Jack doesn't have any powers.
No? Well, could look fabulous anyway.
And payoff. And of course, the most famous one. Setup.
You can't generalize about this.
Meta-Man, Express Elevator, Dyna-Guy, Snag on Takeoff, Splashdown, sucked into a vortex. Knock it!
Payoff. There are also nice little callbacks in the movie, like how Dash essentially says the same thing that the villain of the movie will say later in the film.
Everyone's special, Dash. Which is another way of saying no one is.
I'll sell my invention so that everyone can be superheroes. Everyone can be super. And when everyone's super, no one will be.
And here's my personal favorite. With his newfound money, Bob buys himself a shiny new car, which is essentially a symbol of his vanity. In the end of the movie, after he realizes that family is the most important thing to him, he grabs that symbol of vanity and throws it at Syndrome, completing his arc in a way. Beautiful. So, now we are moving into some murky territory. There is a rule in screenwriting that I see almost every good movie I know follow, but I don't actually remember reading about it in books about screenwriting or ever hearing an academic term for it, which means that I might have to come up with a name for it. I call it interrupting your conflict. Dialogue, like any other part of your screenplay, is built on conflict and tension. These things should manifest in the dialogues you write for your characters. They can't just be talking about whatever. They have to have a conversation that gives us a better understanding of their character and how it relates to your conflict. But those dialogues will get pretty boring really fast if every time two characters speak they disagree at first, but eventually find a way to an agreement. This shouldn't happen until your main conflict is resolved, which is why, until that moment comes, every time you have a dialogue filled with conflict, you have to interrupt it somehow. Preferably at its most heated moment, never letting your characters reach an agreement. I learned this rule for the first time while watching this scene in Avengers. At some point, this conflict reaches its most heated moment.
You're not going alone.
And just as our two characters are about to fight,
Put on the suit.
Oh my god.
the helicarrier is attacked by Hawkeye. And the conflict is interrupted for the time being. And if you know how this trick is actually called in academia and I just made a fool of myself, please let me know in the comments. We can see the way it works in Incredibles in almost every scene. It always makes these dialogues feel well-paced and snappy. It gives the movie a pretty good tempo. Here we are again at the dinner table scene, where Helen and Bob are talking about Dash and his troubles at school.
Bob, that's bad.
What?
Dash got sent to the office again.
What? What for?
Nothing. He put a tack on the teacher's chair during class.
Caught you on tape and you still got away with it? Whoa! You must have been booking. How fast do you think you were
Bob,
going?
we are not encouraging this.
Tension rises until
Honey!
Bob accidentally cuts through the table.
Great. First the car, now I gotta pay to fix the tape.
The car? What happened to the car?
Here, I'm getting a new plate.
And the conflict is interrupted. Then we have arguments between children, which culminate in a huge fight between all the family members until
Let go of your brother!
they're interrupted by a doorbell. Later, Frozone talks to Mr. Incredible in the car and is actually saying something very reasonable about how they really should stop doing superhero work.
And we're pushing our luck as it is.
Oh, come on.
It was fun the first time, but if we keep doing this...
And before Frozone is actually able to talk some sense into Bob, they are, once again,
A fire. We're close! Yeah, baby!
We're gonna get caught.
interrupted, this time by the police. Touches like this help your conflict stay fresh and strong in your audience's minds, while also reminding them who our characters are. The key conflict here is one between all the family members and their respective issues. And we keep interrupting them because the conflict is yet to be resolved, up until this scene.
I'm not strong enough.
Strong enough, and this will make you stronger?
Yes. No!
That's what this is? Some sort of workout?
I can't lose you again! I can't. Not again. I'm not strong enough.
And after all this time, conflict is finally resolved, and we can all let out a big sigh of relief.
Hey, we're superheroes. What can happen?
Until this happens. The music for this movie is incredible. Like with many other elements, the team behind The Incredibles decided to take an unconventional road here, and instead of your typical superhero movie orchestral music, they went for something more akin to an old campy spy movie jazz music. In fact, initially, they tried hiring John Barry himself to do the score, the legendary composer behind the classic James Bond theme. But he refused. So instead, Michael Giacchino picked up the mantle. And in my personal opinion, this is his best work, and one of the best cinematic scores of all time. Not only does it sound great, but it's also used so well in the movie. Notice how in this scene, the main theme of Incredibles starts picking up, building up to something, and as it interrupted, it deflates. Michael Giacchino said about the score that
The Incredibles score is really about things exploding and people hugging.
Which I think is a perfect description. The music is constantly switching between big bombastic moments and small, quiet moments. There is even some logic behind how the music is used. Or how, at the end of this battle, we can hear this dramatic all is lost music. Which is later played again when Syndrome kidnaps Jack-Jack. But now way faster to add to the urgency. There are so many moments in the movie where only the music plays, where it alone creates the mood and the atmosphere. And that's great. When I watch modern blockbusters, I often get the feeling that the music in the movie was a complete afterthought. Like they just shot the movie first and then thought about what kind of music they would like to be there. Incredibles shows us that music is an important element, and that you have to keep it in your mind. You have to let the scenes get quiet for the music to do the job. You have to leave space for it. And the fact that it works in such a great synchronicity in this movie with everything else once again shows us how every single element was given attention and how they all come together to form this masterpiece of a movie. I could honestly go on like this for hours. Needless to say, I love this movie, but we are running out of time. I hope this video helped you understand the filmmaking and craft behind The Incredibles better, or maybe even helped you appreciate something new about the movie. Needless to say, I love this movie to death, and I will probably talk about it someday again, who knows. Movies like this one are miracles, and I'm glad every time we get one of them. As for the sequel that is coming out soon, well... Wait! We finally made a sequel they've been asking for! Too late? 14 years too late.